Hi everyone, my name is Chloe, and today I'm going to be discussing the book Practical Ethics by Peter Singer. So for some background on Singer, he specializes in applied ethics and he approaches issues from a utilitarian and secular perspective. He is currently a professor of bioethics at Princeton University, and he's authored a countless number of books on ethics. He has wide credibility, and he is considered one of the intellectual founders of the animal rights movement. I found this book really easy and interesting to read because all of the issues in it are applicable to today's society. That's why it's called Practical Ethics. Not that it's Machiavellian in its thought process, but it does take a similar what is approach to ethics and not what ought to be, hence Practical Ethics. So all the issues presented in the book are prominent in today's society and applicable. The internal logic of the piece. This piece is backed by a broad utilitarianism, which is essentially choosing the course of action that produces the best results for all. It stresses equal consideration of interests, which is that there must be equal weight given to all interests. And this is different from, or the broad utilitarianism is different from classical utilitarianism, which stresses maximizing utility, which is similar to happiness. And Singer calls this happiness pleasure. So with classical utilitarianism, we have pleasure versus pain sort of approach, but with broad utilitarianism, the scope is broadened and it's more choosing the actions that are going to produce the best interest for all people. So it's important to define ethics, and Singer does this in the beginning of his book. What ethics is not is overly concerned with sexuality, impractical, influenced by religion, relative, or subjective. So the relativity and subjectivity are important. Singer discusses how just because in one society something is viewed differently doesn't make that not wrong in another society. So essentially, cultural differences don't mean that ethics is one thing in one society and ethics is another thing in another society. And so what ethics is based in reason and logic, and it's universal. And the universality of ethics demonstrates that it is not relative and subjective. So major themes raised in the piece: equality of opportunity versus equality of consideration, speciesism, and this includes a human being versus a person. We'll get into this later. And then an absolute utilitarianism versus preference utilitarianism. So equality of opportunity versus equality of consideration. Equality of opportunity essentially states that all competitors or all people have an equal start in life. It's like all external / environmental factors are equalized. However, being practical ethics, Singer states that it's impossible to equalize all houses and upbringings, and one also cannot equalize genetics. So this concept is unrealistic in a way, and he uses this concept to make a broader claim about economics, arguing that the economic system in place, capitalism, pays those with more intelligence-based jobs a higher salary than those who clean offices, and this in effect is rewarding people for something they were born with because they're paid for having that high IQ. And so because of this, Singer considers equality of opportunity to be an unattractive ideal. Next, we have equality of consideration. So equality of consideration is a more ethical economic system, but it has practical problems. Singer brings up the famous Marxist slogan, which is from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. This produces the most ethical economic system, but it's not realistic because problems arise such as immigration, tax evasion, and black markets. Another thing that I thought was really interesting with the equality of consideration argument was Singer talking about the socialist revolution or the Marxist revolution movement, and socialism was never supposed to be just for one nation. And so the problem you have is, well, one country is socialist, but the United States is still has a capitalist economy, and the people, the doctors, let's say, in that socialist country are going to want to go to the United States, emigrate, because doctors are paid more in the US. And so if socialism isn't universal, there are going to be problems that arise with it, such as emigration out of the country, and again, tax evasion of black markets. So speciesism. Speciesism is defined as the assumption of human superiority leading to the exploitation of animals. And this is where we get into the human being versus a person idea. So Singer defines a human being as a member of the species Homo sapiens, whereas a person is a rational, self-conscious being. So speciesism occurs in developed societies in two ways, either the consumption of animals or experimentations on them. So for consumption, for human beings, or let's say persons, eating meat is a luxury, and animals suffer cruelly in the factory farming process, and this suffering is not necessary because eating meat is a luxury. So therefore, humans are choosing a luxury and choosing to inflict harm rather than prioritizing the interests of these animals, and this is speciesism. The second way that we have speciesism in our society is through experimentations. And Singer first kind of states that experimentations can be justified if they benefit humans greatly, such as saving hundreds of thousands of humans from cancer or whatever it may be. However, many horrific experiments are conducted on animals just for the sake of research and do not produce any clear benefits, and this is morally wrong. And he brings up that we can see this as speciesism because if we would feel wrong if we replace the animal with an orphan child who is very, very, has brain deficits, like extreme brain deficits. If we don't feel okay with this, then this is speciesism, essentially. And then we have our third major theme, which is classic utilitarianism versus preference utilitarianism. And he brings this up with the question, why is it morally wrong to kill? So classic utilitarianism states that killing is wrong primarily because it can make others worry that they are going to be killed in the future and therefore increase their suffering and reduce their pleasure. So this focuses on what we talked in the beginning of this pain versus pleasure concept, that killing another human being, and I find this kind of funny, this argument kind of funny, that killing another human being is wrong only because it will make the people around them worried that they are going to be killed in the future, therefore destroying their livelihood and reducing their pleasure. Whereas preference utilitarianism argues that killing a person is wrong because that person has future desires and does not want to be killed. And it states that the wrong is done when the preference is thwarted. So if a person has a future desire, future plans to live, to do things, someone is involuntarily taking those pleasures away when they kill them, and that is why killing is wrong, according to preference utilitarianism. So concluding thoughts. The equal consideration of interest is by far the most important concept throughout this book, and this goes along with that broad utilitarianism that we see, because Singer really, really stresses, and not just for persons that are human members of the species Homo sapiens, but with a rational, self-conscious being, that's what persons are, but even with animals as well. And so Singer really stresses that in order to think ethically, we need to examine when acting how our actions will affect all and consider the interests of all equally despite race, species, religion, sexuality, gender, etc. All interests need to be given equal weight under this equal consideration of interest and broad utilitarianism. So today we discussed Peter Singer's Practical Ethics. We examined kind of the main topics, which included equality of opportunity versus equality of consideration, speciesism, and absolute utilitarianism versus preference utilitarianism. And finally, we discussed the major overarching theme, our internal logic of the piece, which is a broad utilitarianism, and within that is the equal consideration of interest. So thank you.